My name's Calvin Parker, and I got a story that dates back to October 11th of 1973 when it all begun. So I had been working in the oil field and working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I decided to quit the oil field because I was engaged to get married in about a month. So I quit and wanted a normal job. I called a friend of mine up, which was Charlie Hickson. So when I called him, he said, well, come on down and go to work. So I just rented a room from Charlie for a little bit of week. So we went to work together, and my first day there as a ship fitter on a shipyard at the old F.B. Walker and Son shipyard. We went to work, and it was a good day, but it was hot for an October day. So when we got off work, Charlie asked me, he said, you want to go fishing? And of course, I wanted to go fishing, because that's what we did back in for recreation in '73. So we went and got our fishing equipment, loaded up, and went to a place called the Shaw Peter Shipyard. And when we got there, I noticed there was a lot of debris and all on the field out next to us. But what I found out later, I thought they was just a mess. I found out that that washed in with the tide, and then when the tide went out, it just left it there. So we had a parked, and there was a no trespassing sign, and we had a real hard time getting to where we were. And I kept asking Charlie, I said, this is no trespassing, and I don't think we need to be trespassing. Oh, I fish here all the time. Okay, Charlie, let's go. So I was all game for it. We walked down to the pier, we got set down, and as we sat down, I was looking across the river, and there was a big ship, a Coast Guard ship or a NOAA ship. Anyhow, it was a big ship out there. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, how does these things float made out of steel? And then that's when I noticed some blue hazy lights coming from across their back. And I didn't pay much attention to start with, but then I got to thinking, well, we're trespassing on this private property, and that's the same lights that the sheriff department now uses on their cars down there. So that got our attention. We stood up, turned around and looked. And the time we turned around and looked, it was late. I mean, we seen the blue hazy lights, and then it must have been a door opened up on something on this craft that we had seen. And the lights just got so bright. I mean, they was extremely bright that it was blinding almost. And before we knew it, Charlie and I both was looking at this time, and before we knew it, there was three creatures, and I couldn't describe them, their face and all right now, but they had just appeared right there where we were. Come to find out later, they was floating across the top of the marsh grass and all, and that's how they made it that fast. But these three pictures just appeared. Well, two of them got a hold of Charlie and one got a hold of myself. And immediately I felt a puncture wound in my arm and just got real relaxed. I was actually scared before this happened and wanted to run, but it was nowhere to run. But when this thing got a hold of me and I felt that puncture mark, it just relaxed me. So later on at the hospital, we found out that they gave us some kind of injection. Well, from that point on, when they grabbed me by the arm, they levitated me up and they floated me toward the craft. And I noticed one thing before going inside. I was looking for where all the lights was coming from, but I couldn't do nothing but just look straight ahead and roll my head. I couldn't move my body. But it was coming out of the walls. It's just like you painted lights on the walls there, and they were bright. So we got there, and I kind of looked, and I didn't see any fixtures or anything at the time. And this thing made a left turn, and then it made an immediate right turn, and then it laid me out on I call it an examination table, on about a 16-degree angle. Now, I don't know what they called it, but that's what I called it. So we was laying at about a 16-degree angle, and all of a sudden, out of the ceiling, I had on my back, looking up, out of the ceiling, something about the size of a deck of cards that came down, and it stopped about a foot in front of my head, and I heard it click one time. Then it went to the other side of my head and clicked, then behind my head and clicked, and then it clicked one more time and just shot back up into the ceiling. So I don't know what that was or what all that was about, but anyhow, it made that clicking noise. And then all of a sudden, this big robotic looking creature that had me, and I'm convinced he was a robot because he moved mechanically wise. He was about 5 foot tall, and he had looked like mittens on his hands and all. So he just backed up to the door, and this other feminine looking creature came out. And I'm pretty sure she was a female because a man can just sense a female and a woman can sense a male. I know there's times that I've been to Bourbon Street, and you can tell the difference in the cross dressers, the drag queens and all, and a real female. And that's the sense that I had that this was a female. Whether she was or not, I don't know. I didn't get to look that far down to see if she really was. But she came out, her fingers was normal, and her two middle fingers was just a little longer than her other fingers, or what our fingers would be. And she grabbed me by the cheek and kind of pinched my cheek a little bit, and I didn't feel any feelings whatsoever when she done that. But then she grabbed me by the mouth and prized it open, and she run her two middle fingers down my throat, back behind that little thing that hangs down. It's that's when I started choking. And I just got real choked up, and I think she was trying to get into my nasal cavity for a reason. But anyhow, I started choking and all. And that's when the only thing I heard, and her mouth didn't move. She must have sent a telepathic message. We're not going to hurt you. And she said, we're not. So, I understood that, and it kind of made me feel a little more at ease. But, by that time I was already choking and my nose was started bleeding. So she pulled out and she made a little mumble noise. And that's when the big ugly one, what I call her, robotic looking creature, came back over and grabbed me by the arm again. And I heard a poof like that. And it was another injection. And later on, I found out when we went to the hospital that it's kind of like an air needle or that's what they figured it was at. But they inject it like they do the military, by the gallons when they inject something into you. So it automatically relaxed me when he did this again. Well, she made another little noise and she turned around and left. I guess she was through with me. So when she left, this big ugly creature grabbed me, put me back out on the river exactly where he picked me up. And my arms were stretched out facing the river. And that's when I heard the guy that was with me, Charles Hickson. He said, son, you okay? And I was thinking to myself, no, I'm not okay, but we'll have to be. And that's when we both stood up and turned around and looked, and they were back at the ship by then, and it just picked up a little bit off the ground, and then it just more or less disappeared into the air like a streak of lightning. But we sat there and talked a few minutes, and I told Charlie, he said, well, we need to tell somebody. I said, tell somebody what? I wasn't here because I didn't want nobody to know, because I was fixing to get married, and all I wanted in life was to get married, have children, buy a house, have grandchildren, retire and fish. That's all I wanted. So I said, no, I don't know anything about it, Charlie. I wasn't there. So let's just not tell nobody. Well, okay. So we made our way back to the car. When we got to the car, I had a 1973 Rambler Hornet. It was a brand new little car. And the windows was shattered on the passenger side. That's the same side the craft had landed on. and they was just all shattered and in place with that safety glass. So we opened it, and the glass fell out on the passenger side. And I tried to crank the car, they wouldn't hardly crank. So I must have grinded on it for 15 minutes, and the battery never got weak. And I often wondered about that. Finally got it cranked, and we left. So when we left, we drove up. There was a store just before we get to Charlie's apartment, and he said, pull up here. Well, I was wondering why, because in the state of Mississippi, they have blue laws, and the stores shut down at a certain time every night when the blue law's in effect. But he seen a phone there, a pay phone. Back then, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have computers, so you didn't have to worry about all this media and stuff. So he went to the phone. We hunted a dime. He called Keesler Air Force Base. Well, Keesler told him, he explained to him what happened. Keesler said, well, we don't deal with this kind of thing anymore, to call your local authorities. Charlie said, okay. So he came back to the car and he got another dime. We had to dig under the seat to find it. And he dropped it in. I heard him talking to somebody at the sheriff department then. So when he told him what happened, I heard Charlie say, you got to promise me you're not going to laugh. And I was listening to one side. Later on, I found out they did laugh. The detective said, well, we're not going to laugh. And then I seen an interview later on with this detective. He said, and I laughed. So anyhow, Charlie told them about what's happened. They said, you boys sat right there. So we sat in the car waiting on the sheriff department to get there because they thought we was drunk or on drugs or something, and they wanted to come check us out. So they got there, and they looked inside the car on my side, wanted to see my ID, so I showed them my driver's license and ID, and then they told me to step out of the car and stand on one leg, jump up and down, hold my head back, touch my nose, close my eyes, and count backwards. I thought, what a bunch of idiots. Yeah, they figured we was drinking and just trying to have some fun. But then when they got through with the field sobriety test there, they said, follow us to the sheriff department. And we did. We cranked up and followed them, which was about 8 minutes away from there. And when we got there, they had a balloon of some kind. They made me blow in. They didn't make Charlie blow in it. But I sat there and I blew in that balloon till they was convinced I hadn't been drinking. So they put us in separate rooms. They took Charlie in one room and I in another room, and they started interrogating us separately. Then all of a sudden they brought us out and they put us into a room together. And when we went into the room together, they had a tape recorder in a drawer we didn't know about. And that's what they call the secret tape now. So I didn't get to hear it up until about a year ago, this secret tape. But we talk about we was scared and what was going on and all this. So that's what really convinced them that we was telling the truth. And they already proved we wasn't drinking because of the testing for your blood alcohol. So when they got through, the sheriff came in, the big sheriff. He said, y'all go home, and we'll see y'all tomorrow. So we did. We went out and got in the car and drove ourselves home. And then when I got home, I got to thinking about maybe it's a possibility that we might have bacteria on us or radiation. So I got to worried about the other people that was around us getting something from this. I wasn't too worried about myself having anything, but I was worried about the other people. So when I got there, I went to the bathroom. There was a gallon of bleach on the bathtub. I took all my clothes off, my shoes, I put them in a paper bag, and I poured this bleach over my head and washed it off, just in case it was some kind of bacteria in there. Then after I got through burning, I went on to bed and tried to sleep. I didn't sleep any that night. Got up about 6 the next morning, and Charlie and I left going to work. Well, when we got to work, it was a lot of different cars there that shouldn't have been there, and we knew that. But we didn't. We really, the sheriff had promised us that he wasn't going to tell anybody, so we really didn't think about it being the press or anything. But we went on to the workstation, and that's where the guy that owned the shipyard called us in and told us to come to the office. And I knew right then that something was going on. He said, "We cannot conduct business here. Our phones is ringing off the hook. I don't know what happened to you guys, but y'all need to give a press release right now. And I'm going to call my attorney in that takes care of the shipyard business. And y'all tell him and he'll give the release to the press." So we did. We talked to the attorney. And I'm still wondering, now, how in the world did they find out? But after talking to the attorney, I told him my concerns about being contaminated with something and maybe make everybody else sick. So he made arrangements to take us to Singing River Hospital right there in Pascagoula, get us a good examination, blood work, and all this. And they said, "Well, y'all look fine." And then they called and said, "We're waiting for y'all at Keesler to do the radiation test." Well, that was kind of scary itself, because they put us in a patrol car and turned the lights on, and they drove straight to Keesler Air Force Base. Never had to go through security or nothing. They flagged us on through. And we got back, and there was 6 men in hazmat suits, and they come out and checked us out and did something, had some kind of instrument they checked us with. And they said, "Well, y'all all clear, but they want to see you inside down the hall." And I thought, oh, Lord, I've heard stories of this, But it went real well. They escorted us down the hall, and there was a lot of military officials. It was a lot of local officials like mayors and police chiefs, and from 3 little towns that lived right there by the coast. So I guess they was trying to figure out how to handle a situation like this. So the military questioned us, told us they was all through, and we could go. So we drove back to the shipyard, and that same day that we got back, Dr. John Allen Hynek had already heard about this, and he was on his way and told them to keep us there until the next day, that he wanted to talk to us. So I was actually planning on going home that night, but when they said he was down and needed time, at the time I didn't know who Hynek was. He was just a name. I heard doctor in front of it, and I said, well, he must be important. So the next morning when we went in, Dr. Hynek and Dr. John Allen Harder was there. Well, Dr. Harder gave us a physical exam. He looked at my arm where we had them puncture marks. He was going to do a regress hypnosis on me, but he had to bring me back out, but he did on Charlie. Well, while doing that, Dr. Hynek pulled me in a room and asked me a lot of questions. Wanted to go to the site where this happened. So, I agreed to do that so I could just get rid of him and go. But everybody was extremely nice about it. His end conclusion was, well, I don't know what these guys went through, but they went through something traumatic. And if they actors, they should be in Hollywood because they're doing a good job at it. And that was the last I seen of Hynek, and Harder, really. From what I understand, he went out to the scene, investigated, looked around. I don't know what he found or what he didn't find. So I got back home. We got through there. I got my car, and I hauled my butt back to Laurel, Mississippi, 105 miles from the coast. And I knew I was going to have to tell my family something and friends, but they never asked me about it, so I never told them nothing, and I kept that up for 45 years. Now, I later on found out who broke the story. Back then, people were nosy. They had their nose in everybody's business, so everybody had a scanner, and they scanned the police department and the fire department, and they must have heard it come over through the sheriff department intercom. And that's how the story actually got out. through the Mississippi Press picked it up, and then all the nosy people picked it up and called in about it. And it was hundreds of reporters there, though. It went international well, still going international. This has been going on 45 years. So I just done what I said I'd do. I kept my mouth shut. I tried not to tell nobody. But I tell somebody, I got fired. I got hired, fired, and a physical exam all on the same day. And that's just about the way it happened. My first day at the shipyard, then I got abducted that day. I got fired that same day because of interfering with shipyard business. But I was happy to leave. So I went back home, and then when I got home, nobody asked me about it. We didn't talk about it. And that November, this happened October 11th of 1973. So November the 9th, which is next month, I got married. And till this day, my wife has never asked me about it until we started working on the book. So when we was doing the book, I answered a few questions about it. And that's really strange the way the book come up, because we was at a friend's funeral or wake, and I signed the register. Normally, I wouldn't sign my name to the register. And somebody recognized it, and they started asking us all kind of questions. And that wasn't a place to talk. So I said, I'm getting out of there. I'm not showing no disrespect, not necessarily to the man, but to his family. So we left, and on the way home, my wife said, well, maybe you ought to write a book. Well, me being uneducated and all, and I couldn't really spell my own name when you get right down to it. I said, well, if I find a ghostwriter, I will. And that was my way of putting her off. I knew I wasn't going to hunt no ghostwriter. I just wanted her to shut up about it. So I'll be darned, the next day, Philip Mantle from the UK called. Well, when he called, he was on a complete different subject. It was on a book that Charlie Hickson had wrote. Well, we got to talking, and he had asked where I'd been. I told him I just didn't get press releases or nothing, because every time I'd get one, they would change my story in the press. They would want to make it better than what it was, and that's pretty traumatic, what I went through. So I didn't really think you could add to it. He said, well, why don't you do a book? It would be your legacy then, and they can't change it. Actually, that made a lot of sense to me when he said that, but I still didn't have no intentions of writing a book. So I told him, well, let me think about it. I said, Philip, I don't have an education or nothing. I don't want to write no book. I said, let me think about it. I figured he would just forget all about it. He told me he'd call back in a week, and a week to that day, he called back. And we sat there and talked a little while, and I still was real reluctant about doing a book. And I said, well, Philip, the only way I'll do it is if you don't change nothing in the book. I said, I don't have an education. You don't correct a misspelled word. You don't put a period or question mark or nothing in anywhere. What I say and the way that I write it is the way that it should be. He agreed, and he has stood by that, his agreement, 100%. And I really admire the man for doing that. And since then, we've become real close friends. And I've never really met him, but I'm going to the UK in August to meet him. But he published the book. He didn't edit it, like he said. He took a lot of criticism for not editing it. And I would really have to come to his defense. And that's like I told him. He didn't edit it because I asked him not to edit it. So that's where we stand today. We're selling a few books and going around to these concerts. Somebody asked me what happened. I just tell them to read the book. And that's easier on me than having to sit up and explain to them. And they all get the same story at the same place. And still, to this day, I hadn't talked to none of my family about it, just my wife when we started doing the book. And I had said that she looked normal. And when I said that, she favored more a human being. I never really looked at pictures of aliens or nothing until I got into this. And then I started looking at some of the pictures that the people had, and some of them's pretty far out there. And she didn't look nothing like this. I'm in the process now of getting an artist to do an artist sketch of her for my descriptions. It just takes time to be able to sit down with one and all. But I do have one hard that I'm going to do that with. But she had facial features. She had ears, nose, mouth, eyes. The only difference I could see than what a human would look like, her eyes was just a little smaller. And I count that probably to the bright lights inside that craft, maybe. But I've seen these big-eyed creatures going around, what they call the grays. I've never seen one of them in life. Now, the big old ugly creatures, they just machines as far as I'm concerned. What I perceived about the ship, the size of it and all, the outside was kind of oblong shaped like a football to me. And actually, it was probably about 80 or 100 foot long when it landed there. And when you get in, I don't know, for some reason it just looked bigger in there. The rooms was bigger. But I just seen that hallway in that one room, and I was escorted in and out the door. I never seen any control panels or nothing like that, or nobody else except for the female alien. But I'm sure there was some in there. In 1993, I was on a fishing trip, and it was a Cat Island is 6 miles from my house by boat. So I told my wife I'm going to go fishing, and I'll be back before dark. So I got in a boat, she fixed the lunch, and I went to Cat Island, and I guess I got there around 11 o'clock that day. And I got my lunch out to eat it, and then the next thing I knew, it was probably 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. My lunch was still right there where it was, and I had all this time missing, and I couldn't figure out where it was. And that's when I went to see, when I got back into the land, I told a friend of mine, and he was extremely smart because he even helped invented the mammogram to detect breast cancer and all. So he was in the medical field. And he said, look, there's a guy in Tampa, Florida, speaking right now, and he said, the reason I know, because he lived in Tampa, he just come down for a visit, that wrote a book on missing time. And I said, well, who is that? He said, Bud Hopkins. And he said, I'd like for you to go talk to him. I said, well, I won't talk to him in front of a crowd if he's at a conference or anything, but I would like to talk to him. So we jumped in the car, and me and him went to Tampa, Florida, which is 12 hours from my house. And I said, would you go in and tell him? He said, he's speaking here. He said, certainly. So this friend of mine went in and told Bud that I wanted to talk to him. I didn't think Bud would know me from anybody, but apparently he knew my name and all, and who I was and about past my go. He said, yeah, y'all go to my room. I'll be there in about 30, 35, 40 minutes. And sure enough, we went to his room, and that's when Bud Hopkins showed up. He introduced himself. Of course, I introduced mine, and I told him my experience with the missing time, that I had several hours missing. So Bud wanted to hypnotize me. I said, okay. I've never been hypnotized. Dr. Harder tried it and didn't have much success at it. He says, well, let me try it. Maybe it'll be a little better. I'm going to try to make it easier on you. So I said, there's 2 things that I want from you, Bud. Number one, when you hypnotize me, I don't want it to be like a Las Vegas floor show. Like you get out there and make me do something stupid. I don't want you to put nothing in my head. And I said, to make sure of that, this friend of mine, I'm going to give a ball bat to, and he's going to beat your brains out if you do. And I said, hand me the ball bat, and I'll take the blame for it. Of course, I was joking with him, but he took me real serious there for a while. So we went ahead through the hypnosis. He put a post-hypnotic suggestion in my head that I wouldn't remember none of it till it was time for me to remember it. So when I started writing the book, I told Philip Mano, I said, for some reason it come up talking about Bud Hopkins. I said, oh yeah, Bud tried to hypnotize me and he never was able to do it. He said, Bud Hopkins? He said, yeah. He said, well, he's passed away now, but maybe he's got a tape on it. I said, okay. So we called Dr. Jacobs, who has all of Bud Hopkins' files, and asked him. And Dr. Jacobs said, yeah, we got the original tape where this happened. With Calvin's permission, I'll send it to you and let you listen to it. So anyhow, Dr. Jacobs called me, and I agreed, to let Bud do it. So he sent the tape to Philip Mano. Philip did the transcripts from the tape. It took him a few days because it was, an old cassette tape and hard to hear. So he did the transcripts and put them in the book. Then he sent the transcripts to me per email, and I opened up, and I just read a little bit of them just right there. And I thought, well, darn, I was hypnotized. I got up and I went out and I told my wife, I said, I was hypnotized that day. Believe it or not, I don't believe it, but I was actually hypnotized. And we have the transcripts in there. Said, I don't want to listen to them because I don't want to put anything in my head as I want to remember this as I remember it as it happened. I said, but you can go in and listen to them and see what you think. So she went in and listened to the tape. And I said, don't tell me nothing about it or anything because I want to remember it. And then to make a long story short, we skipped a little time there, and I had an interview with Linda Moulton Howe. And she had done her homework, and apparently she had listened. We went ahead and put it in the book, but I didn't read it. I didn't listen to it. But Linda Moulton Howe had, and she started asking me some personal questions on there, and that triggered my memory. Now, till this day, I hadn't read the transcripts, but I'm remembering as I remember it. So I don't want nothing put in my head that's not in my head yet. And that's where I stand on that. And I still got a little bit to remember, but it's coming to me. And when it does, I talk to my wife, and she's read the transcript, and it's been working out really accurate so far. So, and I know Bud didn't put nothing in my head that wasn't supposed to be there, because I had a friend that I trusted in the room with us, him and his wife. So, there wasn't nothing out of the ordinary put in there that wasn't supposed to be. The name of the book is Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, Calvin Parker. And as far as I know, Amazon is the only place to get it. Now, the book has been getting great reviews. Everybody says that, it's not like an author would write it. It's different. It's like we sitting down in front of you and you telling your story. It's never come to question in there if any of that was true or not, but I've got all the evidence in it, the polygraph test, voice stress test, eyewitnesses. So it's all in there. And that's like I tell anybody, you get two witnesses, it's in the Bible, you get two witnesses come together, you can put somebody to death with that. And that's the way this is. It's got more than that in it. So I would recommend somebody reading it. It's not for all the people. And if somebody believes it, that's fine with me. They don't believe it, I don't care. They don't believe it. That's up to the individual. So that's just the way that it is.